Okay. So if you will remember where we left off from the last video, we'll pull up the code here. We should have a structure like this over here on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, we have an overall project called Flask tutorial. We have an application inside of that project, which is called Flask. Inside there, we have our templates. Our templates are going to be our HTML files. If you remember, these are Jenga 2 templates. And this allows us to build HTML and be able to have an overall base. So we have a base.html, and then we can inject content in for the login page. We can inject content into that base for the register page. Outside of our templates, we have our init file. This init file is essentially like what we originally were playing with our hello world. So let me pull that up real quick. This was our original hello world file. Our init serves as that so that we are using this as an application. All right. And so that's where it sets this Flask name as itself, aka Flask. If we look through these, this was test config information. Our main route that we have is hello. So if we go out to our main application and we run this, we should get here. And if I go to whack hello, we would get our hello world that we originally set up. If we want to get to all of our other files, we put those under auth, right? And we have auth.register. So for auth, what we did down here at the very bottom is we registered a blueprint. Remember, a blueprint is kind of like a grouping of views being links on a website. Think of /auth/register. Those are each individual views. Put those all together and those become a blueprint. So we have this auth blueprint, which is this auth.py. And this just has URLs that are associated with authentication. So we have our main register one. Notice we had our methods of get and post. We always check for our post first, which means they submitted something in some web form. If they are not submitting, they are using a GET request. So remember, when you go out to a website, that's a GET request. If we send data to a website, that's a post. All right. If not, we're going to render our template here for auth register, same way with login and some way here. We had two little decorators here. One is to check to make sure that the user is logged in. We can add this to our pages so that they only see that content if they're logged in, right? We are doing that through the use of session cookies. So when a user logs in, we set a session cookie in both the browser that matches the cookie in our database. Right? And if it matches and all's good, we say they're logged in. Last but not least, we tell them how to log out. And then we have this decorator here for login required so that they can't use or view pages unless they're logged in. All right. Outside of that, we had to set up a database and a database schema. So we created this simple Python file called DB, which allows us to do all of our database functions. So the first thing we do is get DB. This just allows us to connect to a SQLite database. In this case, with Python, we use SQLite 3. That is a very flat file SQL database. So if anybody's ever used MySQL, Postgre, all of those are all SQLite, right? Those are generally running on a full-on server. You got some server somewhere running that service. With SQLite 3, we all just do that in a file, which means it works great, but we can't do thousands and hundreds of thousands of accesses to that one file that we created, right? For the purposes of what we're doing in this class, SQLite 3 works great. All right, we have functions for getting access to the database, closing our access to the database, initially setting up our database, and we do that based off our schema. So if you go back and look at our schema, you remember that we're creating two tables in our schema. We have a user table and we have a post table. The user table just has an ID, a username, and password, right? The usernames have to be unique. In our post table, we have an ID for the post that we're doing, an author ID, which is an integer going back to our user ID, the time it was created, the title of it, the body of the post, and then a foreign key that references back, as we were talking about. All right. That should bring us back to our speed. Under instance folder, that is where you'll see our SQLite database. Remember, in PyCharm, we can double click on that and we can see all our fields over here on the right-hand side. So we can actually see what is all in these individual tables. So if I double click my post table, we'll see that I have these columns. I have no data in here. If I click on my users table, we can see we just had one user and that password is set up to be using a script encryption. So when we do web apps like this, we never want to post the clear text password in a database. That's a no-no, right? So how do we do our scripting and how do we do our encryption? If we go back out to our auth, we can look in here how we do that, but we're essentially using functions called check password hash and create or generate password hash. Those are from a third-party function called WorksWorks Security. All right, those are just Python modules that we're using. That allows us to do a salted hash on these passwords. All right, when we collect a clear text password from a user, we're taking that in, we're hashing it, we're pulling the hash out of the database and comparing the hash to see if it matches. Therefore, we don't know the user's password, we just know what they typed in. And we're never dehashing anything, it's a one-way hash going out. All right, everybody kind of remember where we're at now? Okay, so our next step, if you recall, when we went out to our website, is that it's ugly, right? It's just flat HTML, no CSS at this point. We need to kind of clean that up and tailor it up a little bit. So to do that, we need to use static files. So if we click on this next section here called static, this is going to allow you to work, but it's very plain. We're going to use some CSS to add some style to that HTML layout. It won't change, so it's a static file, right? A CSS file is a static file. You may use this with things like Bootstrap. You may write your own CSS code. We're going to go over Bootstrap and some stuff in this class so that you guys can get up to speed fast. Kind of like what Streamlit did automatically for you. All right. So we have a static view automatic that is served up from the Flask static directory, and anything that's in there can directly be accessed from the web server. All right. So the base HTML template already has a link for this style sheet inside of that template if we went and looked at it. Besides that, you might have other files in there like JavaScript or images like our logo, things like that. All those will get plastered under our static folder. So if we come out here, we have our Flask-R. We need to host a static folder inside of our Flask-R one. Not this outside one, but inside our Flask-R. All right. So we go Flask-R static. So let's go out there and take a look at that. Flask-R new directory static, all lowercase. Okay. And from within that static, we want to dump in this CSS file. This just gives us a little bit of flair to our text or to our code. So all we have to do is highlight this code that they provided us. Control C. We go into our project. Inside our static CSS, we right-click, new style sheet. And inside that style sheet, I think we just called it style. Yeah, it was pretty simple. Style. And inside this, we can paste in our code. Notice how it automatically formats it when you use things like style sheets inside PyCharm. So it's all color coordinated. It's really, really slick, easy to mess with. You can also see here what colors are dealing with it. So if you have a background of ease, it gives you a preview of what colors and stuff it's going with.
So useful, there's no backup plus to change.
That's correct.
What I use.
So if you save this, now if we go back out to our website here, right? And you'll notice when we're trying to access this website, if we actually inspect our source, inspect, and we look at our network, you'll see that, like, if I refresh this, now it's all stylized, right? But if we go and look at that, that file there, you can see that it actually pulled style.css. Before, we would have got a 404 right here saying that we can't find that file. And that's the reason there was no styling to your application. What connects this style CSS to the actual website? If we go look at our template, which is templates and auth and register, you can see right up, it's actually in our base, sorry. Up here at the top, we see this link right here.
If you put that just in the register, it won't affect auth with it. Or
because this is on our base, it pulls for everything that's associated with auth/,
Okay.
right? If we wanted like our register page to be overridden, then inside this, because you can see this is in your, we would have to make a section here in this block head. We would create a head section, and that way we could dynamically put it into this login template where we have block header. We would actually want to specifically call one for our new style sheet, or if this is using a separate style sheet through. But the goal now is that if we look at our application, we're stylized and we look a whole lot prettier. Okay. Anybody got any questions on how that works? Now, again, you can use things like Bootstrap, and we'll talk about things like that here in a little bit. So now in our tutorial, this again is our static page. We can serve up images. If we wanted an image at the top of our sheet, we throw the PNG file or whatever into the static folder, make a reference in our HTML, the logo appears. Okay. Now, a lot of times when you guys are dealing with things like, say, Bootstrap, right, you actually put a link to a CDN of the CSS file. You don't usually download that to your machine, right? So that allows us to dynamically pull that. The only problem with that is it requires internet access. So if you want this web application to be 100% offline or just local only, then you need to go grab the CSS files from Bootstrap, et cetera, and download them, or JavaScript files. But then we can override the Bootstrap defaults with our own CSS styling sheet. And most of you guys have done at least a little bit of CSS styling, so that you can do that for overriding. Okay, so next section is our blog blueprint. So we have our auth one that deals with all of our authentication. Now we need to set up the pages that allow us to actually create a blog, a post, right? So we're going to use those same techniques that we had before. We're going to go into our project directory. Just kind of minimize some things. We have an auth here. We want to create one called blog. So we go to Flaskr, right click, new Python file, and we're going to call this blog. All right. And when we copy this text from here, you can tell it's set up very, very similar to what we did with our auth, in that it imports the necessary packages we may use, and then we're setting up our BP, which is our blueprint called blog. Super simple. All right. We also need to create that into our init file so that we actually pull in this register. So what you want to steal down here in this init is just this section here. We'll copy that. Go into our init file, and then down below here, you had it where we imported our auth. Right below that, you just import this section here. Okay. Notice that we're adding a rule that says on a /whack, that means go to the index. So we're just setting it up to where if you go straight to it, like if we go to straight auth, nothing happens, right? Let's try that out here. So if we go out to our register and we take off register and just do auth, we hit enter, nothing gets found. However, if we do that with blog, now it would take us directly to it. No, it's not yet because we're not finished setting it up yet, but that's the goal. Okay. So from here, we, unlike the auth blueprint, we don't have a URL prefix. So the index is just whack, and then create view is at /create, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So for our index, we need to just create this route for our root index, and we will dump that into our blog.py. There. Back. What's great is when you guys need to go create your own, copy and paste this, tweak the little pieces that match your project, and move on. Does that make sense? Like, don't sit there and try to reinvent the code. Just copy and paste that section out. All right. We then need to create an HTML for the basic one of our project as a whole. So we're going to copy this code. And under our templates, we need to create a folder called blog, right? We had one for auth. We need one for blog. So directory blog. And inside blog, we're going to create an HTML file in there. And that one is called index. In our little template, we're going to wipe out what it gives us by default and dump in our blog. So what does this do? It extends our base HTML. So this base HTML works for our auth, it works for our blog. That's the beauty of a template system. You use the basic one to hold all your CSS, all of your styling for your entire website, and then you have certain sections that you want to be formatted in a certain way, like authentication stuff versus the blog post stuff. But if I want to change my entire theme, I don't want to use gray anymore, I want blue, I simply go to my base HTML, change that in there, boom, it's done for the entire website. It's the beauty of templates. Okay. So once we have that base HTML in there, that all looks good. Now we need to set up a create page, AKA when we generate a post. So inside our blog, we need to set up a create section. And if we take a little look at that code, it looks very familiar to stuff that we've done before, right? We have our get and our post for these. If it's a post, here's all our format. If not, render our create template. What we're doing here is just having a form for them to type in our blog post information. In this case, it has a title, it has the text that we want for a blog post, and it saves it. Super, super simple. So we come out here. Now we need to create that HTML page, which just has the styling, right? The form that we're going to be submitting that stuff into. So we go to our blog, and besides index, we have one called create. Wipe out that and paste in our stuff. And if we look at create, it's very simple. It just has a new post header, and we have a simple form here that tells us what we're putting in it. It's not very complicated. All right. The next one that we need is an update. This allows us to go in and actually update a post. So if we made an error, we need to edit it. We are using one called update. To do that, we have to have a function called get post, right? We got to pull it out of the database so that we can display it on the screen, and then we can edit it from there. So we're going to grab this function called get post and dump that into our blog. And all this is doing, if we look, is going out to our database, gathering all the information, and then sending that to an HTML template so that you can then edit it, right? If we go back to the website, is our form empty or full? Right. Every time we go to a website, our forms are empty, right?
Yeah.
So if we want to edit something, we got to go retrieve it out of the database, provide it to the template, then the template dumps it in for us. Then you modify it and hit save, it saves it back to that one with that same title.
Yeah.
Right. If we look at that code, it just simply doesn't execute here. If the post is none, we do an abort 404. Basically, that post ID doesn't count. So we have to pass in an ID in order to get a post. If for some reason that doesn't exist, we abort with a 404 page not found. If it does find it and the auth ID does not match what it should be, it's a 403. Why would we use a 403, not a 404? Everybody remember the difference there? 404 means
It didn't find the page.
it's not found, right? Where a 403 is what?
Like, they find it, it's just like.
Well, in this case, it found it, but it says your auth ID doesn't match somebody else's auth ID.
Yeah, somebody else's article.
Oh, so 403 is forbidden.
403 is forbidding, not authorized, right? So what that's the reason we're raising a 403 is yes, that post is found, but you are not that user, therefore you don't have access to change that. You're logged in as Sam, and Sam did not create this post, therefore Sam cannot edit the post.
Gotcha.
It's a very, very simple check and balance there.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So from that, we posted that in, right? We did the update. Get post. Yep. Okay. So now we want a section in our blog that will allow us to get the post ID. Notice it goes in the URL. So we will have something like mywebsite.com/1/update. One refers to the ID in the database for that particular blog post. All right. So we're going to edit that. grab that into our blog. And we want to do that when we're editing things. It's going to be structured just like an identical new post, right? Only now we're dumping the code into there and putting it in. So you'll notice that this update one looks eerily similar to a create one. The only difference is now instead of inserting it into, we're going to update the post where it was already set. So when you guys remember a little bit with databases, we insert it into the database that creates a new record in the database. If we want to update the record, we use the update command. So it's a little bit different SQL syntax that we execute there. Okay. And slow me down if you guys want me to go into some of these sections a little more in depth.
I think it's I'll just have to like go through and be like, okay, what does this thing do? Change it and then see how it affects.
That's exactly right. It's the best way to learn how to do it all.
But it is nice that it gives you all of it, and then you can go back through and break down the pieces that you need.
Yeah, so like this update.html, yeah, it's cool just to copy and paste. What does that actually mean? Well, you copy and paste that in as your template, and then you modify it to work for whatever project you're doing.
Yeah.
So if we look at this update one, it just changes the header to update. We change our title, and we can change our form bodies to automatically fill in that information for us. So let's put that into an update.html. New HTML update. And paste that in. Again, just like any program you build, you do CRUD, right? Does everybody know what CRUD is? Ever heard of CRUD? So look up CRUD real quick and let's see what it says.
Do I need to look that up under a specific link?
Just Google CRUD, C-R-U-D.
A coding or installation of filter residue.
There you go. So it's a coding practice, right? What's the C stand for? Create, read, update, and delete.
Okay.
Basic functionality of any program that we do, a record for somebody, right? We need to be able to create a record. We need to be able to read that record,
Update that record. And
update it, and delete it. Simple CRUD method in operations.
Cool.
All right. So now we're on to the delete section of this. So we're going to highlight all of our blog here. This one just allows us to get an ID and we're going to delete it. It's very, very simple. Okay. So let's go out to our blog. We're going to paste that one in. And again, all this is doing is creating the option for us to delete things. To delete it, we're going to go to this URL where it has the ID, whack delete. And if it gets the post ID and it found it, it automatically deletes it. Which isn't super secure there, right? What if I just go to the website and do this ID number / delete?
It needs to check if you're the actual creator of the.
Exactly. So if we look here, we see this decorator. That's what that @ symbol means. So if we have @ login required, that is going out and making sure you're logged in so that you can actually delete it. But at this point, as long as I'm logged in, I can delete anybody else's post, right?
It just requires just anyone.
At this, I mean, yeah, if we look at the information it's requiring, it just wants the ID of the blog that we want to delete. As long as we're logged in, it lets us delete the post.
So we need to check if
We need to figure out if we match the auth ID or something like that,
or
right?
if the ID of the poster matches yours.
So right now that's not what this program's doing, right? I'm sure it gets there, but right now it does not.
Does that sort of go back to that 403, 404 error section?
Kind of, we would have to write something like that, right? To really beef up this project at this point. So now if we stop ours and we restart it, we simply go out to our website. Notice that if we don't put in anything at the top, we have a route for just straight whack now, right? And that takes us to this view. So now we have our project up here called Flaskar. We have our posts that go down, nothing there. We can go to login and log in with our account, which I have no idea what I set it to the other day. There you go. And notice when I hit enter, it took me back to the original page, but this time I'm logged in, which means it tweaked the upper right to say my username and a logout up here at the top. So how did this work? Well, if we go out and look at our main page, which is our index, right? And we look up here at the top, if G user ID and auth ID. So what that G user, if you guys remember, this is what it passes in if it exists. If there's a user logged in, it sends it here so we can look at our edits. Okay. Same way with our base. If we look at our base, see this G user? This G user, AKA if the user's logged in, then pass the G user username. Think of G user as an object, right? It has all these different things to it. It has the username. It has the ability to log in, log out. It has our password access. All of that's here. Okay. And these are the URLs that it's going to show. Notice how it does an if or an else and ends our if. So if the user's logged in, show username, log out. Else, AKA they're not logged in, then we're just going to show register and log in as the links. Yeah.
Are we gonna keep this?
No, just Python. Yep.
Yeah.
I would not wish that evil on you if we tried.
I'm grateful. 'Cause that sentiment is not reflected in every course at this university, and I'm struggling.
Yeah, no, PHP is very, very
Very verbose.
dead.
We may need to have some cap limits on what can show up on the post, because I thought
Yeah, right. So right now it's just a basic blog, and you're right. You can throw thousands of things in there. And what allows that is if you go to our SQL schema and we look over here when we used body, we just use text. And we would have to look up that schema to figure out what the max limit is on text. Right. That's a cool thing that we can do in Django is we can actually set max characters and limits and things like that as to what we want it to actually store. Right now, you could actually store the entire code to some application in there, right? Just stores text. So, all right. So if we click new up here, notice that link is taking us to whack create, which then gives us a title. If we try to save it, it's going to give us an error for please fill out this field, right? How did it get this? If we go look at our code and we look at our create, this has the input that says required, right? That's a basic HTML thing. If you say it's required, it shows up and says it's required.
Professor, quick question.
Yes.
Whenever kind of followed along on this and I do the login procedure, it doesn't tell me that it failed, but yet it doesn't put my username in the upper right-hand corner. It doesn't actually log me in. But
Okay.
I have verified that it's created in the database, so I know the connection to the database is there.
Does it give you any information down here in the debug section?
It does not. Just 304 HTTP1 register 200.
200 means it's successful.
Correct.
That means that it's.
So you're basically seeing what I'm seeing on my screen here.
Yes. 200, 302s, 304s. Basically the same thing.
So if I had to guess, if you're not getting a G user, then there's probably a section in your even the auth one where you're missing I want to tell you what. Just stop this and I'll let you share. I assume you can share.
Yes. There we go. I was clicking the button, but it wasn't.
it's all out on it was like the longest piece of text I can think of.
Okay.
Okay, so auth, logins, registers, that all looks good. So let's look at your website.
Well, I just find it funny. Some random user comes across it and just sees the first post.
Actually, at the bottom there, if you scroll up, what command did you use to run that? Just out of curiosity.
It's the debug command.
Okay, yep, that one will work.
Okay. And this is what I get. If I click login,
You're not sharing that. You must have just shared the app and not the whole screen.
Ah, okay, my bad.
No, you're all right. I only use Zoom enough to know.
Let's see. How about this? Is that better?
There it goes. Yep.
So then I do that. Yeah.
Okay, so when it kicked you back here, it looks like it's not creating a session cookie would be my guess. So it like, does your browser not allow cookies by chance?
No, I don't have anything like that set up.
Great Chrome. Okay. Or if there was a cookie, try opening up that page like an incognito. I'm curious. Okay, so whatever it's doing is it's not setting a session cookie so that it can pull it back. Let's go look at your PyCharm code. And let's look at the auth.py. And required views, wrap views. That looks good. Let's scroll up just a little bit. Keep going.
See, that's not real. That's me trying to go to Python at like 2 in the morning and passing out like.
So that session dot clear.
First
Okay.
witch practice.
That's not going. Keep going up. Log in. That all looks good.
I think this is the same code that like Twitter uses. Creating it. Creating a new. Or creating another Twitter.
Keep going up.
Is there a copyright for that still?
That's the
Okay, now
top.
go all the way to the bottom.
Make a new Twitter.
I think you're missing a chunk there called.
I think so,
Just
because the,
double
I
check
think the
here.
URL is still there.
Oh, is it?
It displays as X, but I think.
There should be one called load logged in user. Do you have that function there? I'm trying to get back to your screen here. Nope, that's the one you're missing.
Okay.
I
I
is
goofed that.
on. Nope, you're good. So that, let me just find that page for you so I can tell you where it's at.
You said you wouldn't want to run like thousands of people off of this. Why is that? You think like too long to load or something?
Yes, because you're on a flat file, so you're based on the IO of the flat file versus an actual server that's meant to serve up with cache and all that kind of stuff. Let's see here. There you go. It's this section right here. Oops, I'm not sharing. Let me share real quick.
Sharing's caring.
Do that. Create me a bot and make new profiles.
This one right here is the piece you're missing.
How long is the video? It's an hour 10.
Yeah, it's actually.
So in your auth.py, you just need to copy and paste that baby in.
Okay. All right. I will throw it in there. Sorry to hold everybody up. I just
No, I guarantee you're not the only one. That's the reason I left the recording going. Because we already solved a couple of these here before the class started today. So yeah, you create a tile here, ASDF, body, and as some in the class have figured out, you can put whatever you want in there, hit save, and now we have this post that shows up here. We have this option to edit it, which then takes us to our update page, which loaded all this information in, also gives us now the option to delete. We could change this, something like that, hit save, and it updates it in the database. So now if we go out and look at our PyCharm and we actually look at our database, and let's look in our post table, you can see that we have this post created in here, right? We have an ID for this post is 1, an author ID is 1. This auth ID is a foreign key back to our author table. So if we go back and look at our user table, notice how my login is 1. That's that auth ID.
Every username and password will get a
New ID. Yep, it auto increments this ID. We don't set it. When you create that entry, SQL automatically creates that ID for you. Right? Which means when you delete the user, it can go back through all these other tables and say, I can delete anything associated with that ID. All right, if we go back and look at our post, we have that. We have the date created, and that's an automatic timestamp that's created when we hit submit. The title of it and our body. So when I have an editor like this in the database, I can now look at my website, see how this is all ones going across here.
Mhm.
If I go in the database and change that directly in the database and hit enter, then when I refresh this page, control refresh, shift refresh, it's not should automatically pull
Could you save it on this side?
it. The way this edits, it should do it live in the database. In theory. Let's do that.
Interesting. Welcome to.
Should have automatically updated that.
So
So let's see here.
right here. We'll save, and then we can move that over here.
There you go. So now you can see it updated to what I changed it as. So it's pretty slick. It pulls it out. And then you guys can modify some of the back end if you guys wanted to play with the back end side. All right. If we follow the rest of the tutorial, which let me get back to our templates and then static files, blog, make project installable. So this section basically is telling you how you can make this where somebody can pip install it for you, right? So I want to give you my app, you pip install my app, and it runs through it. So this allows you to create what's called a TOML file. This TOML file basically sets up your project. So this is our Flask, our version number, some description, and what dependencies are required, in this case, Flask, right? Build systems that we're going to do it through, etc. Now, if we do a pip install -e, it shows us what's currently installed, right? And then we can go ahead and run it. In this case, I'm not going to actually show you this part. For us, we're not going to build a pip wheel file. We're actually just going to pull it from GitHub, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. Last section here is over test coverage. So when you really get into bigger projects, you need to use what are called test units or unit tests. And this allows you to test your project in multiple ways so that you can make sure your code's viable, right? Without you having to actually create a bunch of stuff. So you can write test files where, like in this case, it's going to insert 2 users into the database. It's going to create an empty body in the text. And then when you run that as a test, it auto-populates a database with a bunch of fluff data for you. Does that make sense? And then you can make sure your functionality works back and forth. There again, I'm not going to necessarily walk you through this side of it. If it's something you guys want to play with, you guys can go ahead and set up your unit tests in here as well. All right. The last section I do want to show you is deploy to production. So we showed you how to build your wheel file and do it as a pip install file. That all works. In the future, we would create a secret key, and then on a production server, we need to use what's called a WSGI server, right? So right now we're just running this local, right? And it's got this makeshift server, but it doesn't really work the best. It's just a development server for testing, right? If we want to go into production, we have to use some kind of WSGI. The one they show here, an example, is called Waitress. And so you would install Waitress, it goes out, and all this is doing is handling all of your web or your web server backend. So Nginx, Apache, all the ones you guys are probably somewhat familiar with, those have WSGI modules so that you can use Nginx to host this. So that one might use GUnicorn, or it might use GUnicorn is the main one I use. There's a couple other ones that you can use to use WSGI. Some are super, super fast. Some are slower than others. Some have other features. And so if you just go out here and do a search for WSGI server in Google, you will see that WSGI stands for Web Server Gateway Interface. All right. This allows you to interact with your Python projects. And what's the difference between Nginx? Nginx is a web server, but it's not meant to design interactively with Python projects. So you use either a WSGI or an ASGI, A being asynchronous, to interface between Nginx and Python projects, providing benefits, separation of the concerns, right? Nginx handles all your proxy and your web stuff. unicorn, or in this case, waitress, solves all your issues with your web application. Everybody kind of see how that works? Okay. All right. And again, there's several different ones you could use. You could use this waitress one, etc. So if I was deploying this on a real computer, I would pip install waitress along with what I'm doing. You would call this command, and you could probably set this up as a cron job in Linux, and it's going to start serving up the website as a whole. Now, on the keep developing, this is just going to show you other things that you should do with this project, right? As you guys found out, there's no limit on post titles. We should add some stuff. So what they want you to do is add a detail view to show a single post, click on the post title to go back to its own page, right? Create a like and an unlike post. So you have a like and unlike option for like Facebook, right? Maybe you want to be able to comment on posts. So you would set up the database to have options for storing comments. You could set up tags. You could set up a search box that would pull it back, upload an image, format the post using Markdown. So that way you could actually have some styling to the post. Right now you're dumping in raw text, right? So instead of raw text, you would dump it down as Markdown so that when it showed up on the page, it uses a Markdown. Everybody figure that out so far? So again, Flask is going to use Jenga templates, click the Workruzig, or this one here. This is all your security stuff that you guys are using, plus a built-in Python web server that you guys are using for development. And then It's Dangerous is going out and using that for security stuff. So SSL, all that kind of stuff. They all have documentations. There's a lot of extensions that you can use within this. So if we look at extensions, we can see you can build one out called something like Flask Foo or Foo Flask. The idea is that this would allow you to add extensions to your initial program. Right. So again, Flask is to build a very, very simple web application, right? Start with the basics like what we just did, then go back and do some security enhancements, right? Because this is a great app, but it's pretty broken. In other words, if I come out here to post and I come back to the main website, right? I log out, notice I can still see these posts. Well, I should, right? But I can no longer edit, and I can no longer get into anything. If I go to register and I try to register with an account that's already there, I should get an error. User is already registered. And we'll see that this is now formatted in blue up at the top. Blue is probably not a good color, right? Something like red or pink or something like that. So if we wanted to use something like that, then we would need to edit what?
Yep.
CSS, but where are we wanting to edit that CSS from? So we know we edit the CSS, but we have no idea what our tag is for that header. So where do we go first to figure out what's on this page?
Go to the registered page.
We could go to inspect. That's one way to do it. And if we inspect our top here, which is better if I actually just right click on it and inspect. There we go. We can see this is a div class for Flash, right? We have a header tag on there for register, div class equals Flash. So we are going to know this CSS, which if I click on it, go out to my style.css, we want the Flash section. And if I change this background, instead of that, we go to something more red. Like over here, notice how it automatically changed it over here. So you guys can get a full preview of it. So we do something like that. We want it to actually be darker. Shade this guy around. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay. We changed this, right? Is that permanently there? No, right? We're just using it in our tools. But what's nice is now that I have the code that I do want to change, I can go into my style.css, which is under our static. Look for our Flash, which is right here. Take this background code out and paste in our new one.
Can you change it to some of the colors on the web?
Yep.
Oh.
So you go there and you can change that out as well. It's two different ways to do it, right? But that's what I wanted you guys to see.
It's kind of like Adobe Color Code or something like that. What I used to go to.
Yep. But here you can use the tools built into Google. You can also use the tools built right into PyCharm. Anybody got any questions on that tutorial? Okay. So here's what I'm going to do now. Let me stop this recording.